Our next guest has insight into both of those issues. Please welcome to the show, America's accountant, Dan Geltrude. Dan, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Scott.
First of all, we've had a pretty interesting day here with the world trying to come to grips with what's been going on in the interest rate world. What are your thoughts about today's market action? Where do you think we go from here?
I don't think what's going on today has to do with interest rates. I think the market is understanding that they're going to have to deal with an interest rate increase or increases. I think what's happening today is really driven by international uncertainty and whether we're going to have a war anytime soon. And it looks like we might, related to Russia and the Ukraine. I think that's what's going on right now. And believe me, nothing good is going to come out of that situation, Scott.
No, and it's, I mean, I could do a whole nother show on the reasons to and not to, be involved with that. But I will say this, whether you're in the interest rate market or the Fed's going to have a big impact on what you do for a living, these issues, both geopolitically with Russia and the Ukraine and with our own domestic policy when it comes to interest rates, they're not going to really be over. Like, it's not going to be a binary outcome. We're going to have to deal with this with probably at least 4, 5, 6 months. Who knows? 8 months. This could be something that we're going to have to deal with maybe for all of 2022. So it's not going to be over right away. So we're in this for the long haul.
I agree with you, Scott. And here's the problem with where we are. I think that the Biden administration is punting the inflation problem over to the Fed. And they're saying, you fix it. But this should really not be with the Fed. The reason we're in this inflationary period, which of course is causing all kinds of consequences up and down the economic line, is based upon policy.
Right.
And if we keep going down the same road, and if Joe Biden's policies happen to pass through Congress, and let's hope they don't, but if they do, it's more stimulus on the demand side, which is only going to make inflation worse, which is going to force the Fed to raise interest rates. And once we start doing that, Scott, who knows what the impact is going to be on the market? I suspect not good.
Right, I wrote an op-ed. It kind of just played right into my hands there. You can disagree with me if you want, but a large part of that inflation problem is energy, I think, right? I mean, energy is involved with everything, getting the goods to market, and it's in the goods that we make, right? And so if we would have had a coherent energy, plan, we would have taken a lot of the wind out of the sails of this inflation because, look, gasoline's up 50% year over year. I mean, that's got to be a large part of that component. And then transporting all the food that you eat, which is also through the roof around the country, is part of that as well. So I reckon if we would have had not this move or this revolution over to Green New Deal rather than an evolution, let the consumer take their time, I wrote that I think that we wouldn't have the inflation problem we would today if we had a coherent energy policy that let the consumer make the choice of when and where they want to get rid of fossil fuels and move over to renewables. What do you think about that?
Well, I actually agree with most of what you said there, Scott. It's a funny thing. For some reason, it always seems like Europe is kind of out in front of us, starting with COVID and now with energy, because basically Europe sold their soul to Russia. Right. So they're basically energy dependent upon Russia, which is causing, again, all kinds of geopolitical problems. And what do you know? Here in the United States, we end up doing the same thing. We had been energy independent. And what do you know? Inflation was kept down, even while we were going through the pandemic, at least initially. Now, because we've decided to give up our energy independence, we are at the mercy of countries, Scott, that are not our friends. And that is absolutely going to have an impact on inflation because, as you said, everything has to go from point A to point B. And what does that take? It takes fuel. It takes energy to do it. Those costs go up because we're beholden to other countries. We all pay the price for that.
Well, as they say, Dan, and this is no pun intended, but energy is power, right? And that's the bottom line.
It is.
So let's talk real quick about the IRS, right? I mean,
Speaking of power.
That's a great segue, isn't it? Right, you got
Right?
that, didn't you? They're moving more and more into our lives on a daily basis. Now, look, I'm not saying nobody should, pay their taxes, but that's something that we have to deal with. But it just seems that they're overarching, looking over your shoulder now and getting into your personal business. Now, with these cash apps, whatever, you should be paying tax on that no matter what. But now that they want a facial recognition face shot, where does this stop is, I guess, my best question with you.
Well, here's where we are with that, Scott, right? So as we rely more and more on technology across the board, we're giving up a lot of our privacy and a lot of our freedom. Now, in this particular case related to what the IRS is saying, starting in the summer, if you want to be able to access your account with the IRS, not to file your tax return, not to pay your taxes, but to access your account, you're no longer going to be able to use a username and password. It is going to be done based upon facial identification, right? So now we're talking about a whole new level of seeing through us, right? And what makes it kind of worse, or maybe better, but what makes it worse is the IRS is not capable of doing this, Scott. They're actually hiring a third-party purveyor to do this, ID.me. So now what happens is you actually have to sign off on a consent policy a biometric consent policy that is giving them the right to access this stuff. Right. And they could also share this information with, get this, select partners. Now, who are those select partners? Well, that's up to them to decide. But surely compliance with law enforcement will be one of them. So now it's effectively giving the IRS our DNA. Where does it end? It probably doesn't.
Right. I mean, the poor kid that mows lawns is going to be, he'll be all over the place with his DNA. All right. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's Dan Geltrude, America's Accountant. Thanks for being on the show today, Dan. Here's a look at the equity.